We have got probably the biggest and best lineup. Forget World of Coffee, forget London, forget Nottingham, forget cancelled Birmingham, but we have got 4 amazing, energetic people, and I'm going to go along each one of them and you can introduce yourselves to us. So, Camilla, tell everybody who you are, please.
My name is Camilla Morgan. I have been working in coffee for about 15 years across coffee roasteries, equipment, suppliers and all sorts. I'm really excited to be here because I live in Messingham and I've been travelling all over the country and Europe to do these kind of things. So the fact is that you're only 5 minutes down the road from me. It's absolutely amazing. Thanks for hosting it, Stefano.
No, it's not just me, it's Alex and it's Daniella and it's everybody behind the scenes as well. So big shout out to them.
Hi everyone, my name's Jonathan Morris. I'm a historian, professor of history and the author of Coffee, A Global History, and I can actually say the book is available here in Cafe Natura and I will sign it for anyone who buys it.
Have you brought your socks with you? Because last year you brought some socks, didn't you, that people could buy?
I don't have them for people to buy, I just have my special collection for myself.
Alex.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Mackay. I work for Victoria Arduino, hence my beautiful jumper here. So we supply the machine into Cafe Natura. So if you're drinking a delicious, lovely coffee, that's the reason, partly with the great baristas here. Like Camilla, I've worked in coffee in a variety of roles, from a barista all the way up to an equipment manufacturer and roasters in between. And it's been about a 15-year journey so far. So here's the next 15, I think. And thanks again to Steph.
No, thanks everybody for coming. And last but not least, and he's the only man, I'm going to say it, but he's the only person on that, and he's not got it with him today, but carries a spoon in his pocket for certain reason. The one day to guess it. Go on, Tom.
So I'm Tom Altoft. I work for a fairly local roastery called Lincoln and York. It's a private label, so not many of you would have heard of it, but we supply lots of coffee shops around the UK and Europe. So you probably have drank some of our coffee without knowing it. I've worked for them for 24 years, worked my way up from the packing line in the factory up to production roasting, and now head up roast profiling and tasting the coffee quality.
I don't do any of them things, I do different things, but I am a coffee professional, I'm a podcaster, collaborate with Daniella and Alex, and we put amazing events on like these, and I am super passionate about coffee and everything in between, and like to connect with people of similar ilking. So we've got lots of questions that have been sent in by different people. We're going to throw some out there. So the first one we've got is from a lady I work with, she's called Meg, and she's asking, what is the rarest coffee? And I'm going to throw that to Jonathan, and if I think Tom might be able to add some of that as well. So what can you think of is the rarest coffee, Jonathan?
Okay, so actually I'm slightly hazarding a guess on this because there is a coffee that is currently being served in London at the remarkably cheap price of £295 a cup. A cup, yeah, I did say a cup. And it is from the island of Okinawa in Japan. And I've never drunk this coffee, I hasten to add, because I don't pay £295 for any cup of coffee. And anyway, but I was asked onto the TV to talk about it, which is why I know it is there. And I have to say that actually, having heard about it, it is one of those coffees that is essentially, it's a story. And the story is there is very, very, very little coffee grown in Japan. Indeed, I have to say, until now I never knew there was any. So it's from one particular farm. So you could say that that's the rarest coffee. And yeah, I think that would be my shot for that. Let's find out what Tom thinks.
Is there anything you've come across, Tom, that would be like on that rarity type of scale?
Yeah, mainly that are quite high priced coffees. So your special, maybe Jamaica Blue Mountain, that's quite a specialty rarity. That's quite around the same £100 a kilo cost. Anything that's small produced, like your Civet Cat coffee as well. That kind of that's
which
quite
is the Coffee Luwak is a
Coffee
kind
Luwak.
of like that's on another scale, isn't it, with what it is. But I think I read something that was an Indonesian coffee, and it was something to do with elephants that eat the coffee and then it's then produced. And I think I looked at its price, and for a 40-gram bag it was £135. So is it rare? I don't know. It depends on your value, I suppose, how much you want to pay for something. But
all of these are what they call story coffees. So the rarity and the price reflects the shortage of the supply rather than stuff.
The quality.
Exactly. This is the key thing to say. So that the Japanese coffee I was talking about turns out to be, I asked them what it was as a species and how they treated it, and I think it was a Natura. Yes, which is not really kind of where we would normally expect. So there was something else. Yes, the other really rare coffee that you hear quite a lot about is, two actually. One, I'm getting into this now. Okay, one is from the island of St. Helena. So why is the island of St. Helena rare? Well, the island of St. Helena is tiny. It's where Napoleon was finally exiled, and Napoleon was very keen on coffee. And so St. Helena coffee is often sold, and again, because St. Helena is so small, there's very, very little of it, so it would be at a very high price. But this is like Napoleon's coffee.
So the next question we've got is from Richard, and he says, is there a carbonated coffee drink in the world? And if not, why not? But there may well be. So whoever knows the answer, because I'm not sure. I think there is some, but does anybody
I can chime in
know?
on this one if you'd like, Stefano.
Please.
Funnily enough, so Camilla and I used to work together years and years ago at a coffee roaster called Union Hand Roasted Coffee. And one of the sort of innovations that we tried as a new kind of drink was a coffee which was called Sparkling Black. Do you remember that one? Yeah. And essentially it was a sort of cold brewed coffee, which was then carbonated and infused with a little bit of sugar as well, just to kind of balance the flavours out, and then to be used as a kind of, I don't know, like a sort of mixer on the side or something. Personally, I thought it went great with rum. So I don't know if we got the marketing quite right on that one in itself, but the other example that you see of that quite regularly is espresso and tonic, which sounds really odd. Try it first and then see what you think, because you'd be very surprised at how much interesting balance and sweetness you can get from it.
I mean, generally quite mild thinking that in like places like Japan, where the coffee culture over there is like canned coffees and things like that, would be a big call for like carbonated drinks that they do dispense from machines that we're not kind of like within our social culture. So is that something that is big over there as well?
I think it's more in like places like the USA. You tend to see a little bit more of that kind of fizzy drink culture, if you like. I don't know if there's the right phrase for it, but I think it tends to be a little bit more focused on ice drinks in different markets. I think in the UK, we don't exactly have the weather for freezing cold coffee most of the year, so I don't know if that's maybe an influencing factor of it as well.
Yeah, probably so. The other thing that's quite a recurring theme was decaf. Now, decaf seems to be popular for lots of different reasons, for lots of different ways, but Tom, I think aim for you would be, somebody asked, again this was Richard, he said, what's the process for decaf? Is it the same type of process that they're going to use when you just get the beans? What give us a bit of info about decaf, how it kind of like works?
Well, there's quite a lot of different processes for decaf. So generally the main one is methylene chloride, I think that's how you say it. So that's where they get the coffee, bathe it in a lot of chemicals, and then kind of extract the caffeine that way. And then generally, once they've extracted the caffeine, they sell that they use that for like Coca-Cola and Red Bull. There are other types of processing, so there's a CO2 process, a sugarcane process where they use like the extract of sugarcane to extract the caffeine. And
I think I've heard of one called sparkling water as well.
And there are different types of what we call water processes, which use just like water to get the caffeine.
To link back that into caffeine then, how much caffeine is left in coffee, even though when it says decaffeinated, because obviously there is some element of caffeine left in there. So can you answer that one, anybody?
I mean, there is some in there, but it's negligible.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
probably the
small
best way to say it. Like, you're never going to be able to remove all of the caffeine from every single coffee bean that goes through. Obviously, coffee beans are the same, but like apples, they're not identical. So a good way to think about it is like they're all going to have slightly different densities, slightly different shapes, sizes, and so on, and that will influence how much caffeine is drawn out during that process.
I used to be of the mindset, death before decaf. I was on that parade going, decaf is not good. But what's happened in the coffee industry lately is more emphasis has now gone on decaffeinate quality coffee. I love coffee. However, if I drink caffeine after a certain time in the day, it's become more of a health choice for me. However, drinking coffee is something that I'm not ready to give up. And it wasn't until I felt pregnant that I started to drink caffeinated coffee, and I was really surprised if it's prepared really well, how identical it will taste to other coffee. The challenge is that most people that orders decaf will then get decaf that's pre-ground or that may not. As you grind coffee, as soon as you grind it, you then have about 15 minutes before the gases are released and the aroma is lost from the coffee bean. If you are able to grind decaf fresh, the coffee experience is going to be so much greater. And do explore it because it is really good.
Yeah, I think we've done some tastings here before, and we've presented coffee to people that didn't know what they were drinking, and we've presented the decaf speciality from different roasters. You don't mind about the roaster as long as it's kind of like a good roast, and people have not been able to pick out the difference between the decaf and a washed coffee that was alongside it that was a caffeine, in there. So and if you're drinking decaffeinated, you're kind of like a bit of a purist because you're after the pure taste of it.
The quality has improved over the years. Even the standard MC process, that a few years ago you could really almost taste like the chemical residue almost, but even that kind of coffee is getting up the game in recent times.
While we're on the caffeine element, another question was posed by John. Jonathan might know this for caffeine wise, but why is it important? And I'm going to use the emphasis there of the Western world was built on caffeine. So why is caffeine good and bad, or why is caffeine not good for some people? But can you link that back into as far as caffeine wise?
Well, I think the thing to say is when coffee is first adopted as a drink, a lot of it it's presented as a health drink, and it's presented as a psychoactive drink. So caffeine is psychoactive. It does speed up certain processes within your body, and it speeds up your thinking. Is the big argument. So the origins of caffeine and the early coffee houses, the theory was, well, okay, prior to that, people are basically drinking alcohol whilst trying to transact business, etc. So if I want to do a deal with Camilla, I go to, as it were, the old tavern. We both discover that we're actually drinking and we're probably not making as good business decisions. If we go to the coffee house, we have a much sharper conversation. Wow. Probably I lose all my money to Camilla, but nonetheless, it became popular because it's actually okay. Instead of people refreshing themselves and losing their ability to function, they're actually heightening their ability to function for that period. So there's a lot of we could go, or rather someone could go into the whole science behind caffeine and its ups and downs, but the basic psychoactive function was of course very new when it arose in somewhere like Europe. So that literally there is a buzz around coffee as it arrived because wow, this thing makes me buzz. This thing makes me kind of, think quicker, move quicker, do stuff quicker.
Lovely. Question from me to Jonathan. So my question is, there's a lot of myth and legend around coffee and the stories that go with it, a lot of different elements, but is the Caldi story, so if anybody, you can explain the Caldi story, but is the Caldi story true or false?
Okay, so the Caldi story is the origin story for coffee, and I'll try and recount it in one of its many versions. Kaldi is a goat herd somewhere in Ethiopia. There's a big dispute in Ethiopia where Kaldi comes from, by the way. I've just discovered this because I'm trying to do some work on Ethiopia, and nobody wants you to say that the story or coffee comes from one place. Everyone says Kaldi comes from there. Kaldi's a goat herd in some period which we can also discuss when, if ever, Kaldi was. He supposedly looks at his goats one day. His goats are eating red cherries or red berries. He looks at his goats are eating the berries. The goats start acting unnaturally active and becoming very lively, and Kaldi of course thinks, well, what a great idea, I'll try a few of those, which he does, and lo and behold, Kaldi also goes off dancing around the place, and he thinks this is great, so he takes his berries back and he meets the local scholar, so probably a kind of a Muslim cleric, and says, hey, you know, I found these berries, aren't they good? Do you want to try some? And the guy tries some, eats a bit, thinks it's disgusting, spits it out, it lands in the fire. It gets roasted in the fire. It smells fantastic. So they think, oh, let's just scrape those berries back out of the fire and grind them up and make a brew out of it. Well, yeah, you can believe that if you like. Unfortunately, no one has any historical evidence for Kaldi. The first time that Kaldi is known to us is in is kind of an origin story that comes in 1690s when it's written down by a guy called Fausto Norino, who is somebody originally from the kind of Lebanon area who goes to Rome and begins writing in Rome. Is it true? No, it's really the truth, isn't it? It really true. Isn't. Surprisingly enough, is it true?
Don't say that.
Is it?
Jonathan, it's like saying Christmas.
And this is, I think, the more thing. I think the interesting thing about it. I know, but there's an interesting thing about this to me, and that's the whole bit of the involvement of the religious scholar. Because actually, in as much as we know the history of coffee and the early history of coffee, that's critical, because what happens is that coffee is the first sort of licit drink for Muslims. So this whole argument we just had about having a buzz from coffee then becomes factored into a discussion about, well, alcohol is banned under Islam, and it's banned because it gets you intoxicated. So if you're using something that intoxicates you, that shouldn't be used. Well, coffee's not intoxicating you. So they have several, what they call trials, as it were, where in effect coffee is put on trial. Are you allowed to use coffee under our religion? And the basic verdict always comes down to, well, yes, you can. Most of the reasons why people don't want people to use coffee, so the reasons why coffee is at various times banned or attempts to outlaw it, are not really because of coffee's underlying characteristics. They're because of the fact that people got together to drink it, and that's considered subversive. But so to go back to Kaldi, what's really interesting is this introduction of the religious figure and the whole roasting element. That's the bit that really sort of suggests that they've kind of had to think the story through, but they've thought it through with connection to the way that things occur.
Well, if we hadn't thrown that into the fire, then Tom wouldn't be here without his spoon and wouldn't be roasting coffee on his like.
I'm thinking of Tom going into the fire with his spoon and scraping those berries back quickly. Yeah.
So leading on to another question I think we've got is, because coffee's in a precarious balance around the world, isn't it? But what can that mean for venues like this? So what is the future of coffee shops, Camilla, under the current climate of where we are with things?
It's really challenging. I'm going to ask everybody in the room, I said, have you ever been to a pub and paid more than £5 for your drink? Put your hand up. Right? How many of you would absolutely gulp if a coffee shop charged you £5? Right? All of us? But if I tell you it takes 160 man-hours to prepare the coffee bean before it even reached the hopper, right? The preparation and skill that is involved in making coffee from farm to cup is incredible. However, we place quite low value on the cup of coffee. And if we're going to have any chance of having an establishment like this, we need to become more prepared to pay more for quality coffee. I have to say, this establishment here have chosen to serve you some of the best specialty coffee you can get, which also means that they're paying a premium for the coffee here at Cafe Natura. They could have chosen to serve coffee that cost half as much. However, they've taken a stance they want to have quality, and quality also means that the supply chain is of higher value. The people who roast specialty coffee really cares about that journey of the coffee bean. But do we know as consumers, do we know enough about that journey? To have a good coffee, yes, is great, but then you also need to have good service to go with it. The hospitality element of a shop is greater now than ever, particularly as you can get good quality coffee pretty much anywhere. But good hospitality now also costs a lot. And for businesses, this is going to go up again. We've had minimum wage gone up, which is great, but that will have an impact on the cost that's going to be passed on to us as consumers. We need to accept it. We need to frequent the cafes, because if we stop coming, these places will go. I think in the next year, we're going to see more coffee shop closures than we have done pubs. They are struggling to make ends meet because the consumers are reluctant to pay more for the coffee. It's not just the cost of the coffee itself, it is all the ancillary costs to go into running a beautiful place like this. So the future is challenging, but it's dependent on you. It's dependent on the customers in this room. Keep going. If you can, meet here. Keep going, keep coming. The future of coffee shop really depends on you, the customers.
I'm an espresso drinker, so I agree with you that people think, why are you going to pay fortune for just a spoonful in there? But my main question I want to ask you all is, when you drink espresso, you have to have the cup warmed, otherwise it's cold when you drink it. How would you explain or ask someone here? It doesn't happen here, by the way, they're very good, but if you went into a cafe and you wanted to be sure that they're going to warm the cup before they give you espresso without offending them, how do you ask them that? Because they might know, but they might not know. How do you ask that politely?
When I work as a barista, and if people say to me they've got their own special requirements that they want for a drink because they want it making in a certain way, that people would like that cup warmed up beforehand, then I'm more than happy to do that, because if that's what you want and we're happy to give you that service, and Daniella will probably say the same thing, and Alex as well, when they've served coffee, is we will do that for you. And I agree with you, it should be warmed up anyway, but if you've got the right machine on your bar, which Alex will say when your cups are on there, that should be done anyway.
We did away with cup warmers a while ago, partially because there's an extra cost, there's something else to go wrong for the business potentially if it breaks or the element goes. The machine radiates heat out the top anyway, so and part of something that VA is very conscious of in our design and our production of machines is sustainability. That warming of the cup takes energy. Energy isn't free, and so ultimately, I know it's a very small thing, it's the cup, but that has to be a consideration as well for the business owner as well. So yes, absolutely, I agree with Steph. When I was a barista, it was exactly the same. If someone wanted their coffee making a specific way, you're paying me to do it. Of course I will. I will have no qualms or any judgment about how you want to drink it as well, because it's your coffee. And I think that's the thing I think, well, I'm fortunate enough to have lived in the north and the south. I don't see that as much in the north. People tend to be a little bit more welcoming with that kind of thing, whereas I think sometimes years ago you used to go into places in London and you'd almost be laughed out the door if you asked for something different, which is totally the wrong way to engage with your community. But from a machine perspective, the way that we design our machines as well is all geared around, as I say, energy efficiency and sustainability. We know that that's the biggest cost to businesses now. Thankfully, we are very lucky to have a really, really forward-thinking R&D team who were thinking about this long before those energy prices skyrocketed. So in our machines, like the Prima you see over on the little one on there, and the Merrick, they have a lot of tech design and features to allow that to happen and insulate that heat. But ultimately, if you put the cups as the guys have on the machine on the top there, if they're on there for a few minutes, they should be warm enough to provide exactly the heat you need.
I want to ask you my supplementary question, which is, but you need an answer, is how do you actually take it back when it's cold?
Just take it back.
You are the customer.
Yeah.
End of the day, we are here to
Yeah.
please you because we want your return business. So do ask for what you want, because I'm also going to tell you what other customers ask for. They want sugar shots, they want syrups, they want things extra hot, they want things that is not complementary to the coffee. And what you are asking for is something that's going to be complementary to your coffee experience, and that's nothing that you should be ashamed to ask for. Just do it.
And to add to that as well, my first job in coffee was in Sheffield's Students' Union Cafe, which was an incredibly busy place. But we used to have one of the lecturers who came in, and she would ask for a very specific order, which I will recall for you right now, because I made for it so many times. It was a one-shot latte in a takeaway medium cup, served to have in with a white and a brown sugar and a stirrer and the lid off. Right? I still remember that because she would order it 3-4 times a day. Now, all of my colleagues found this incredibly annoying, and how frustrating that they had to do something that wasn't just a standard latte. I took a very different approach, which was she's coming in here 3-4 times a day. She's usually bringing her seminar group or other lecturers. They're buying cakes, they're buying sandwiches. And I calculated one day that she spent £27,500 a year, one person, in our cafe. Now that's an extra member of staff. That's a training course for all of your team. That's a new machine. That's everything that you need. So again, carry on what Camilla was saying, the customer's right, and you should be grateful for that.
Taking the point of that every person that you come across in your life is a potential customer. I know you are a customer service, but we want you to come back, and I would want you to come back because I would want you to come back to the next coffee festival, and Camilla and Jonathan and Alex and Tom and everybody else who's here, because it's kind of like, it's the connection that you get from that coffee as well, and it's that service that you get. It doesn't matter what you're doing, it's your service that you're giving to someone and you're putting your energy into it.
I'm one of those awkward customers, actually. I have half and half. They know me at 7 districts. I'm one of probably those awkward customers. Please can I have half and half decaf, half normal.
Okay.
Yeah. So they all know me. Oh, we know what you want.
I think to have an educated, and not everybody, some people will just come in and want a latte and sit down, and that's fine. But people that come in and they want a particular need, I won't even say it's a need, it's people come in and have dietary requirements. So what difference is it if you are serving food and people want gluten-free or vegan, or they're allergic to certain things? It's very much the same with coffee. You know, if you want your steak cooked in a certain way, then the chef will cook it for you. So are we not chefs in that certain aspect? If you're a customer and you own a business and people come to you and they want the car spraying in a certain way, then would you do it? Would you do? Because it's what you're here for.
For me, as a service provider, the key is to ask before, not to say that's not to my taste. It's to say I want my cup warm. If it's not warm, then you say that's not what I asked for. It's those that think, you know, the message is sent by osmosis. It just doesn't happen. So please ask for what you want.
I like to drink all the time espresso double, because every pub when I go, I drink espresso double. But when they give me Coke, it's normal Coke, but coffee just half or something like that. Like example, cup is big, but espresso double is just like this.
Give you double espresso. So why is it only this height? Wants to know.
I mean, it's as a coffee professional, coffee has a recipe. Coffee has a certain amount of grams that goes in from the coffee grinder, goes into a portafilter, that's then extracted. And the same when you bake a cake. If you want to have a bigger cake, you need to have more ingredients to make a bigger cake. And the same is for coffee. If you want to extend the liquid, add some water to it. But if you want the coffee to taste exactly the way you like your espresso, then you need to ask for another double espresso on top. You can have 4 shots in a go, right? So
it was more better if they make like a cup, right? How is coffee? The volume, you know? Like espresso is like this. Coffee, they must be a little bit like this, you know? Small cup.
For espresso cup. It's like, may I have my espresso in an espresso cup, please? Please don't serve it in a latte cup.
Maybe you're going to the wrong coffee shop and you need to come to this coffee shop.
Yeah. Well, how do they make it in your country?
You want double shot?
Same.
What, half the espresso?
Yeah, and I think if you're of the understanding that, you know, if you go to other countries and you can ask for all the drinks like a lungo or a ristretto, depending on where you're drinking your coffee, if that if the baristas that are working there have, and they've got that knowledge, they'll make you a drink however you want it.
Well, I order myself coffee machine at home, my home,
Yeah.
and also I must buy a cup as well because my cup is big and espresso double is only like this. I tried to find a cup to buy, but I didn't find. I've been every shops. I don't find the cup
ask one of
special.
these to sell them to you.
Oh,
Has
yeah.
to buy one.
That's brilliant.
How important is water and the type of water that you use?
98% of it is water, so anybody else can add to it, but it's the most super important because where we are in this area of the country, it's ridiculous water. It's very hard, but anybody along the panel here will tell you that
Yeah, so
water
I
is so
I
important.
actually spent a bit of time with Britta a couple of weeks, well, about a month ago now, I think it was. We went down to their HQ and we spent a whole day talking about water and the importance of filtration. And water, essentially, like anything else, has a recipe. It has constituent parts that are in it, so different minerals and so on. If you have too many of those minerals, there's not enough space, if you like, in the water for it to pull out the coffee that you want, or the coffee that you want it to into the cup. Other way it goes, if there's not enough of those minerals, you'll pull too much out and you'll find that the coffee's a bit sour, potentially. Also, that will corrode the inside of the machine, which gets very expensive. Don't know that happened here. So, they were showing us examples of, you know, how not to do it. Essentially, they get a lot of filters sent back to them because they recycle them. So good on Britta for trying to do something about that as well, because that's a big load of plastic that's not going into the ocean now. And the state of the filtration inside, you would not believe, from varying different. And they've got to the point where they can look at the inside and the rough colour and go, oh, that's from Lincolnshire, that's from Norfolk, that's from Sheffield, because it's so vastly different in the minerals that you find in the water. So, and as Steph rightly said, the actual total dissolved solids of coffee that are in your espresso, on average, depending on the recipe, the type of coffee, how dense it is, a whole other bunch of variables, but roughly is anything between 1% and 2% of the whole total volume of the drink. So if you think about that, 98% of what you're drinking is water, so that's really the point, that you want it to be more consistent.
And if you see the setup in cafes like this behind the scenes that you can't see, but they will have a whole filtration system. But when me and Alex did the tattoo convention, Alex, the filter system that you had set up there was kind of like super important, wasn't it? That you had a built-in, from the machine, So it's super important that you can't see it, but behind the scenes that there will be a filtration system in there, and quality checks and actually on the incoming water is done as well. So it's one of the most important things that is it's needed.
And so Britta have recently come out actually with a system which is very innovative like that. It works using like an electronic control in the head of the filter that will measure the total dissolved solids in the water every 15 minutes and then adjust the amount of filtration depending on what that is, because the other thing that affects it quite a lot, so I lived in Sheffield for a long time, and Sheffield's got notoriously quite inconsistent water, and it's not because it's bad, it's just because it comes from 3 different reservoirs. So if there's only one particular day where there's a higher draw of water, it'll come from one, and then maybe the next day it comes from another one. So they'll have different elements, and then all the pipes that take it from the reservoir to your site, your tap, whatever, are going to have elements in them as well. So there's that part to consider. So it can be quite a detailed process, and if you really wanted to go further with it, you could look at reverse osmosis systems, and that is a whole bunch of filtration, taking minerals out, putting them back in. And you've actually got cafes. So one of the cafes that we work with in London is a place called Nostos, which is very, very focused on precision. You know, that's part of the reason they wanted to use our equipment, because it's very precise at giving you the amount of water you need. And they design their own water. So when they're doing filter coffees, they'll be sort of pipetting little, essentially chemicals, I don't know what exactly, into the water to extract certain flavours from the coffee, which is a whole nother level of geekery that I didn't know existed, but it's fantastic. And I've got to say, it does translate into the cup. It's not just there and it's smoke and mirrors. It's very much, you can taste the difference, and they'll give you the same coffee with different water, and the difference in them is light and day, you know. So yeah, interesting.
What's the more popular, because we're in a cafe and it's not just about coffee, it can be chocolate, it can be tea, and Daniella does some really nice teas here as well that Twist supply, but I don't know who can answer this, Jonathan maybe, but what's the most popular drink, tea or coffee, do you think?
Takeout, it's definitely coffee. So, sorry, it's an out of home, if you like, it's coffee. At home, in terms of volume, in terms of like the number of cups made, it's probably still tea. But
It's quite close now, though, isn't it? And
yeah, but it's pretty difficult, isn't it? Because we don't we need to know bluntly how many cups of tea you're making and how many coffees you're making, but we only know how much weight of these two things is being sold.
Yeah.
So it's a bit difficult to exactly estimate. But the general consensus, certainly would be interesting to know what Daniella says, because she's running a cafe, so she would know. But my sense is that you'd find far more coffee than tea ordered in a cafe.
Is it more coffee for you? And obviously, I think that goes back to the country, maybe where you are as well, doesn't it? Obviously, you go to America or you go to Italy, and tea's drinking cold, or tea's also drinking out of a bottle as well, but predominantly coffee as well.
I think there's also a very fundamental thing, which is if we're in this country, we all know how to make tea. We all know how we like our tea made, and we all basically, now that particularly with tea bags being so common, we know exactly what we want. So unless it's going to be a specialty tea and you're paying for someone to make it specially, whereas with coffee, most of us don't have an espresso machine sat at home, particularly not one that's ready to go with all the steaming and all the wonderful latte art. We can't necessarily reproduce that, so we'll pay for that, but we are much less convinced that we should pay somebody £2.80 to put a tea bag in a cup and drop some hot water on it and pass it over to us.
But you do that a lot here, don't you, Danielle? Because some of your teas are caffeine, so like linking in caffeine. Your teas that you get from Twist, they're caffeine free as well, aren't they? And they're infused with different flavours as well, aren't they? So yeah, it's obviously another big world out there. So another question we've got, somebody asked, it was Pete, where is coffee grown that's not in a place that we would expect?
So I think you need to start by just, okay, so coffee, the parameters of coffee, you can only grow coffee essentially in the tropics normally, because it can't deal with frost.
Yep.
It can't deal with frost. Of course, we grow a load in Brazil where they have frosts, but nonetheless, it's essentially, for the coffee plant to survive, it has to be frost free. So it can't have anywhere with frost, but it also can't have anywhere that's too high temperature. So normally, and everywhere has been in the so-called bean belt around the tropics. Because of climate change, that's beginning to change. So I'll give you 3 places you may not be aware grow coffee, adding to Japan, which even I wasn't aware of. But one that people miss quite often is Australia, because you can grow it at the top of, I think it's Queensland. Another 2 which have become known of recently, or possible recently, coffee is being grown in Southern California right now. That would never have been the case previously. And somebody has grown coffee in Sicily, they're mad. However, those coffees, it will take you, yeah, exactly, because they could never get to the stage where they could believe there wasn't coffee in Italy. So those things are really becoming just a little bit more possible because of climate change. But climate change is also eroding a lot of the places that we actually conventionally associate with coffee, and making it much more difficult. So there's quite a serious problem going on with climate change.
And to give you an example of that, there was a roaster that, again, to hark back to Union, when Camilla and I were there, they did a lot of work around direct sourcing and had been working with farmers in this way since the sort of 2001 when they founded the company, which is a lot longer than quite a lot of other roasters at that point. And Stephen and Jeremy, the owners, I remember having a conversation with Jeremy once about, you know, what's it like when you go over to Ethiopia, and he said, well, it's very different now, because the couple of the first farms that they ever worked with are now just dust bowls. They can't grow coffee, so the farmers have now had to move out, and usually also up a mountain. So as you can imagine, the logistical cost of that, the human cost of that, the environmental cost of that are all very, very stark. And that's only going to get worse.
Yeah, the mountain's going to run out.
Yeah.
There's no further up to go.
Exactly. And then you hit the snow line, and as Jonathan very rightly says, coffee doesn't like snow very much.
And without leaving that subject, I think it's really important to stress that we have no idea what the coffee industry is going to look like. I want to say 20, 30 years, Jonathan?
The key stat, if you like, or the stat that throws it into relief, is the one that says 50% of where we currently grow coffee on climate trends at the moment would be unusable by 2050. People get very panicked about this and sometimes do things, well, I know I won't go there, but we'll come back to it. But the thing to say about it is there are things that I think mean that we will still get coffee. The much bigger cost is going to be to farmers. We'll still get coffee because we're already seeing ways in which we can do things in terms of, as it were, interbreeding coffee, producing particular varietals. We've got a whole program going on around what's called World Coffee Research. We're beginning to use some other species of coffee that in the past we didn't use because they were either low yielding or we couldn't get the right taste out of them. We're beginning to sort of do that kind of interbreeding. So my feeling is we'll still see a coffee industry, but it will be very different coffee. But what really bothers me is like those Ethiopian farmers in the Dust Bowls, because we won't be going back there to grow these new coffees.
Tommy, you go to a lot in your role. You have been to origin countries, haven't you? So what have you seen?
I've only been once at the moment, so I can't comment too much on that. But we are working with, as a business, with World Coffee Research. They've been sending us like different samples for us to grade. There's like a whole network of people where we're grading the coffees to see how these hybrids match up with other coffees that are out there. We'll score the coffees and then they'll tell us where they're
without releasing any sensitive data and us kind of like getting sued by anybody, is there anything out there that you've tasted that is different that you will think, wow, this is not something we've expected, that can be a game changer?
Not at the moment. There's we've tasted some coffees and they have been like, again, we have to say, would we use this as specialty coffee, would we not? So you kind of fill these forms out to say. There are a few which have come through and we'd say, yeah, they would qualify as specialty coffees. Some not quite, but again, it's this feedback what we give to them, so they know, oh, this plant, what we've done to it isn't, and this plant is, so then we'll take that plant and then carry on from there and maybe make more shoots from that.
I think the other thing that we're missing, or we're not missing, but there's part of the equation as well, and Jonathan, I know you've done some work with that, is kind of like Robusta, because Robusta is, if anybody knows anything about coffee, you've got Arabica, which is predominantly what we're using here, but the other species is Robusta, which is seen as like the other side of the coin. I'm not going to say it's good or bad, but it's another side of it. But there is speciality Robusta as well, and that's really big in India at the minute, isn't it, Jonathan, where things like that are a very big emerging market. So can Robusta or elements of Robusta kind of like help out or destroy what's happening?
The first thing is I think Robusta is already being used in those kind of hybridization programs that you're talking about. So Robusta is a slightly different, it's another kind of species of coffee. It is slightly more resistant to heat. It is slightly more tolerant of damp, and it is more disease resistant, and all of those, and particularly disease resistant, is really important. So we can begin to see Robusta being used. We would normally use Robusta in blends. So Robusta is usually a big composition, for example, of espresso blends, not probably the nice specialty ones that you guys make, but the kind of ones that you would drink every day. The thing I would say about specialty Robusta is that is also becoming a thing, and that for many people in the specialty industry who've been in it a while seems totally contrary to what we used to learn, which was, Arabica good, Robusta bad. One of the reasons I think Robusta has become a bit more able to be specialty is quite simply because we've applied the same degree of inputs to Robusta at last. So nearly all Robusta is usually been sort of just picked once. You throw everything in. If you take, you'd have green beans in with yellow beans in with red beans, etc. If you actually just pick Robusta like you pick specialty Arabica, you can get a nice Robusta. And I've seen a lot now of specialty Robusta. It's in Indonesia in particular where I've been, where they are drinking their own specialty Robusta and brewing it in the same ways that we do in a V60 or whatever, and coming out with something quite pleasant. Whether it would meet Tom's definition of specialty if you tasted it as is not, it's kind of almost not quite the question. It's that we can do something with it. So if we treat it with care, if we treat it in those ways, there are possibilities with Robusta.
Is it good to put coffee or ground coffee in the fridge? I don't know.
No.
I've heard people say yes and no.
I think we can all agree on no.
No.
Don't put your coffee.
You can freeze beans. If you grind them fresh as you're about to use them, frozen beans. I have a freezer full of them. As you can imagine, I meet a lot of roasters, and get a lot of lovely bags of coffee given to me, but it's too much for me to drink when they're within the sort of month of them being fresh.
Yeah, I mean, the reason not to put them in the fridge, in an ordinary fridge, is the moisture, because you don't want the water interacting with the beans. The use of freezing now as a technique has become really interesting, because that's enabling people to do things. My particular interest in it is, well, okay, if we can freeze the beans, we can actually start doing different things with beans at origin. So we could start roasting beans at origin, freezing them and sending them through, so that we could capture more value at origin, as it were, in those original producing countries. So there's quite a lot that could come out of freezing that could be interesting, but it's not something you want to be doing as an ordinary consumer.
And there is a cafe in Australia which is run by a former World Barista champion that has a freezer section. And they have lots from, it's a bit like wines, so they take lots of the same coffee from, say, 2018, 19, 20, and then you can see the differences in flavour, and they're just frozen immediately.
Yeah, like you could have an Argentinian Malbec from 2019, and I'm not going to open it because it cost me £3,000. Not that I don't pay that for wine. I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
Each person, favourite drink, favourite coffee drink.
I can't say my favourite, but my most memorable one was when I went to do my first training at Darkwoods, and Tom Wilkinson, the trainer there, who's been to here before and did different connotations, gave me a Ethiopian yuga chaff, and I was like, this is like sex. Sorry to say that, but it was. I was only drinking out the cup. All I was going to say was. Yeah, it was an outstanding coffee. It was that memorable to me because I'd never come across it before. So that's mine.
Good sex then.
For me, it was the journey really into coffee, because when I started working in coffee, I didn't actually like coffee. I didn't drink coffee. And then I had an experience at the coffee roastery where I blagged myself a job, where I had an experience where in coffee, when we taste coffee and we evaluate the quality of the coffee, we tend to do something called coffee cupping, where we taste with a spoon and try it. And my most memorable experience was having a table of coffees, and for the first time being able to differentiate coffee from coffee. For me, coffee tasted all the same. But from that experience, I went, wow, coffee can taste fruity, can taste bright, nutty, chocolatey, earthy. For me, that was my most memorable, because that opened up the door towards being a coffee career.
Your original question sounded like, did you... Most memorable. Most memorable was the. Yeah, I know, and I've noticed the slippage in the way that my my fellow panelists have answered this, and I'm going to try and move a little bit through them, because I think one thing to say is actually about. I'd start, because often I get asked, what way do you make coffee? You know, what's the coffee that you drink? And people think I'm going to say a latte or a cappuccino or whatever, and. I think it's really important to have variety in the way that you drink coffee. And likewise, you know, I don't have one coffee that I go and buy all the time. Like most people here, I would probably get lots of different coffees. And I think it's a big mistake not to do that. The most memorable thing for me is it's a spin-off from what you say in a slightly different way. So I had some very lovely specialty coffee that I did pay a lot of money for at the time that I got in the States, and I brought back. And I thought I would treat my parents to some coffee. And my dad is a man who immediately puts milk and 2 sugars in his coffee. And I said, Dad, I just want you to drink a sip of this coffee, right? And I can paint you the scene. We're sitting in my garden under a tree. It's a lovely summer's day. It's very relaxed. And I said, Dad, just, I'm going to pour you the coffee. Before you put the milk and sugar in, I just want you to have one sip. So I got distracted. I looked back, he drank the whole lot black. Now that was a really great specialty coffee. It was actually, I'm going to have to tell you, it was a Panama Geisha. And what fascinated me about that is that's, I think, encapsulated in that is actually the story of a lot of people's experiences with coffee. My dad's experience with coffee is that coffee always tasted bitter to him, so he throws the milk and the sugar straight in. If you can give him something that's special, we'll drink it. And a lot of us have that, a lot of people have to make that journey from, oh, it's coffee, oh no, I need the sugar, I need the milk. By the way, I've never persuaded my wife of this. But, there we are. But that was a really notable thing for me.
Yeah, and so, again, to answer the kind of twofold, I think for me, the way I sort of see it is the moment the rabbit hole opened up for me. I was learning to be a barista trainer in London, and for some reason or another, I think we were just having a coffee break or something, and so we all just got given a filter coffee. This particular filter coffee was roasted by a roaster called Square Mile, who, anyone's heard of James Hoffman? That's the one he owns. And he'd done this really interesting thing where he'd got the same coffee from a farm and processed it in 3 different ways. So he'd left all of the fruit on the cherries while they were drying on some of the beans, taken off some of it on some of the others, and completely washed everything off the other side. So you could see the difference that processing made to the coffee. And it was the one that was the natural one, so the one where it had all been sort of fermented inside the beans, that was a really eye-opening one for me, because again, similar to you guys, I think coffee was just coffee. I used to have mochas with banana syrup in them when I was a barista, and just keep your energy going, wasn't it? And I sat down and I had a sip of this coffee, and it tasted like bubble gum. So I just went up to the guy, my trainer at the time, Dennis, and said, "What on earth have you put in my coffee?" And he said, "Nothing. It's just coffee and water." And that really showed me how much you can do with just coffee and just water if you get that recipe and the ratio right. That's why you'll see baristas with scales, with buying machines like the VA ones where they're very precise and they monitor all of this stuff for you and deliver water in a very accurate, temperature stable way, because that's really important as well. Part of the recipe is temperature. And I think favourite coffee in terms of like the way to drink coffee is, again, I'm sorry to say it, but it has to be the pure brew method of filter coffee through our VA machines now, which is a kind of its own brew method in some ways. And shortly, Daniella will be able to serve you that in the coffee shop when I've taught her how to use it properly. So, yeah, that's for me. So filter coffee, which is strange because I sell espresso machines, I know. But so espresso definitely.
Like you, Tom.
Well, I kind of echoed the same as like what Camilla said. So when I started, I was like, coffee was just instant coffee. When I started working, that was all it was to me. And again, it kind of all tasted the same, and then going on that journey from actually tasting the different flavours. So the most memorable was probably the one during my Q grading course. So the course you've got to take to become a certified Q grader, similar to a wine sommelier. There was a Yemen on the table, and it was a natural, and I didn't like natural coffees. When I first started tasting, I was like, oh, these are horrible. Not really sour and
too much funk.
Yeah, but you had to learn. So the group was split. Half of them said it was horrible. Half of them said it was amazing. And so while he was tasting it, he was like, "Well, it's got flavour. I might not necessarily like that flavour, but I can put a flavour to it, and the body of the coffee, the acidity, just that kind of experience to go through." And luckily I passed the first time, so it was the right choice. It was a 90 plus scoring coffee, so yeah, that's probably my most memorable. And then again, it's got to the point of I'm an Americano in the morning, a nice
Can we just give everybody a round of applause? And I would like to thank everybody for coming today. Everybody that's come here today, it's off their own time, and it's a team effort. And when I mean the team effort, we need you to keep coming to places like this to keep them going.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Remember the global history book.
Yes,
of
get your
coffee.
book from Jonathan.